Hey, it's Tim Ashe, President of the Vermont Senate, here on March 31st. Hard to believe it is already the end of March, that we've been in about 2.5 weeks in this new normal. We've been operating under the COVID-19 virus. A couple things to start out with. First off, while we face this crisis and there's so much uncertainty in our personal lives, whether our businesses are going to have resources, whether we're going to qualify for benefits to help us pay the bills, other milestones continue to march along. Today is Equal Pay Day. Obviously, what that really is reflecting is that women doing the same work as men throughout this country do not receive a dollar for dollar compensation. It is slightly better in Vermont, but still unacceptable that it's not on absolute equal footing. It gets worse and worse for people of color who are women in terms of the amount they make for every dollar earned by a man. So I hesitate to say I have almost no red clothing, and typically I wear red clothing at the State House on this day in recognition of Equal Pay Day. So I have this bit of accent color. It's my one red shirt. It happens to be my competitive soccer shirt, so I am not going to wear it on this occasion. It's also, interesting to think about Equal Pay Day in the context of the COVID-19 crisis because, I was very proud watching the girls' high school soccer team at Burlington High School with their equal pay shirts, which caused a real movement and a lot of new awareness of the problem of inequity between men and women in the workforce. And a lot of it was focused around professional soccer players, and because the women's national soccer team has been so fantastic about calling out economic injustice between men and women, and very effective at enlisting a broader enthusiasm outside of sports. What the COVID-19 crisis does really is has us focus right back to the height of the injustice, which is that many fields that are disproportionately have women in the workforce are often among the lowest paid. So it's not just two people doing the same job with different genders getting a different amount, which is completely unacceptable in its own right, but then it's the lower pay for entire sectors that are predominantly women, and what is often called the caring industry, which includes home care attendants, personal care employees, people who work in healthcare settings, disproportionately women in many of the positions that pay the least. Many of the retail industries are disproportionately women. And so as we think about all of the essential workers who are out keeping our society going during this crisis, I think we have to acknowledge that in many of the areas where people are putting themselves at risk, they are disproportionately women and often being paid structurally less. And I believe that there is a lot of historic gender inequality which is at the root of it. So it's on all of us to continue to strive to have true parity, so that people will have equal pay for equal work, and that we will value more the work that is done by entire groups of women in whatever profession it is. I'm going to provide a little update on where things stand in terms of the number of cases in Vermont, the capacity that we have to serve people who may need hospitalization, to put that into a little bit of perspective. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about some guidance that has been issued today from the governor to large retail stores, including box stores. A little bit about the extra challenges facing organizations that work in mental health. Obviously, at times, under so-called normal times, organizations that serve people with mental health challenges already have their work cut out for them with all the stressors and anxieties right now in Vermont and across the country and the globe. Those organizations have to meet an even more significant need than would normally be the case. Then I'm going to answer a couple questions that have come in the last day before wrapping up. So the first data point that I'll mention is we now have 293 people have tested positive for COVID-19. That is about a 37-person jump since yesterday. And 13 people have now passed away who've been infected by COVID-19. And I always want to restate that's important that we not lose sight of the individual lives that represents, rather than treating them just like numbers. And so with each day, it's sometimes tempting, if there's only one more person who has passed away or only X number of people have tested positive, to say, oh, it's not as bad as yesterday. Well, in the aggregate sense, that may be true, but obviously in the individual sense, it's still tragic and painful for both the individuals and their families, friends, and and the whole community. We also right now have about 21 people who are hospitalized throughout the state who have tested positive. So of the 293 people who have tested positive overall, right now 21 are in a hospital. 52 people are hospitalized right now under investigation of infection, meaning they have not yet tested positive, and we will learn more after the tests are completed. So a high mark would be right now would be 73 people hospitalized, but only 21 have actually tested positive at this time. Some people have asked me, well, how many hospital beds are actually available in Vermont? We all know that there's likely to be a peak need at one point, and the number is about, well, I shouldn't say about when I'm going to give a specific number, but 577 beds exist throughout the whole state network of hospitals. So we know that we have been freeing up hospital beds, canceling elective procedures, so that if and when the time comes that we need to use all those beds to handle people who have been infected with COVID-19, we'll have them. So 577 total capacity. Right now, 21 who've tested positive are hospitalized, 52 hospitalized who are under investigation of infection. So that puts some things in a bit of perspective. About 1/10 the hospital capacity being used currently for people either who've tested positive or who may well be positive. That might obscure for some people the fact that many people have not tested positive but likely have COVID-19, but their symptoms don't rise to the level of needing to get a test. As I've mentioned in previous updates, the state has prioritized those with more significant symptoms, not mild ones, or people who are in particularly risky categories, like people who are on dialysis, people in long-term care facilities, people with chronic illnesses. So we have 293 total positive tests. I don't think anyone believes that that is the total number who have been infected. It's just the ones who have risen to the level because their symptoms were so bad that they were approved for a test. I'm going to talk now briefly about an order that came out from the governor's office today, and it relates to something that one of the questions that came in about a week ago raised, and that was if it was about basically fairness and safety. So imagine you are a small retailer that does not do grocery or pharmacy sales, and you have been ordered to close because you haven't been considered an essential business operation in the governor's order. And then down the road, there might be, and I'm picking on Walmart, but it could be any other box store. Down the road, there's a Walmart which sells grocery and pharmacy, but also sells all the retail items that you sell in your store. And Walmart's been allowed to stay open because they sell grocery and pharmacy. So a number of small business owners said, look, I'm willing to play my part to keep people safe by shutting down, even though it imperils the existence of my business. But it's very painful to look down the road and see a parking lot full at a box store where people are coming out buying the things they could buy at my store. And that rang true with many of us because it also raised the question of whether people were unnecessarily going out of their home during this stay-home order to purchase things which are not related to their basic needs being met, like food or medicine. And so today, the governor issued revised guidance or an order directly to box stores. The letter that went out from the Secretary of Commerce references Walmart, Target, and Costco, though it could have included other larger retailers. And it basically says that they are not to do any in-person, in-store sales of non-essential goods, period. What that means is that a Costco door, the doors will still be open, and people will still be able to go in and get food and medical supplies and maybe some other items that are in the list of things that really speak to basic needs. Diapers would be an example. However, toys and all the stuff that is not absolutely critical and for which people should be able to go out and make purchases in order to keep things going back home are to be discontinued inside the store. What that is actually going to look like might differ from store to store, and the guidance that was issued suggested that they could close aisles, meaning put up some kind of cordon to prevent people from going down certain aisles. They could close entire portions of stores, which is maybe easier. It's hard to do in a box, but they could maybe turn the lights off and block off a whole wing. Or they could simply remove all the items that are not essential from the shelves, which for a large box store is probably not practical, but it is their option. They are also requiring that all what are called showrooms, where you might see furniture laid out, or garden centers, they are all to be closed as well. So I guess the two really important things to bear in mind with this newest order is that it's really about two things. First and foremost, public safety. The whole goal of the stay-home order is to reduce the frequency in which people are coming into close contact, to keep people at home as much as possible, except to meet their very basic needs. And clearly, shopping for lots of things that have nothing to do with your basic needs, all it's doing is increasing the risk of spreading the infection. The second piece, and maybe as an ancillary issue, is the fairness issue, because it would not be fair for all the other retailers who have been forced to close and who are very worried about whether their businesses will survive this period to watch their business get gobbled up by a large box store down the road. There will be some questions about what types of things are considered basic needs. School supplies, for instance, one of the commenters is mentioning, and I would say that there's some it's impossible to come up with a rule about very specific items because the list would be 1,000 items long. I think there's probably some gray area about things like birthday candles and school supplies, things that are needed for remote learning, which could include even some electronics to allow kids to access course materials remotely. So some of those things we'll tease out in the coming days, and I'm sure the governor will have to revise some of these to give more guidance in the coming days. For what it's worth, if you're particularly interested in what it looks like when the governor issues these kinds of orders, there's two places you can turn to. If you go to the governor's homepage, which I believe is governor.vermont.gov, you will see an executive order link, and you can read every single one of the executive orders that's been put out. They are easier to read than most laws, so they're actually not so challenging to work through. And so I would encourage that. Or if you have a particular area of interest, for instance, orders around healthcare, each state agency is making it very clear where the guidance is on their website. So if you have trouble finding any of that, please let me know. So that's the short story on the box store order. And I'm seeing questions popping up about seeds so that people can start gardening. And as I say, they're closing the gardening centers, but but basic needs, which probably include seeds for growing food, we will see what that looks like. Incidentally, I have actually heard a considerable amount of worry from people throughout the state who work at places like Home Depot and Target, wondering why this is continuing, because they've seen people shopping under the exact same conditions they did before this crisis. So from a public health point of view, I really commend the governor for taking this step, and from a fairness point of view, I certainly do as well. I want to talk briefly about the particular challenges that are now being faced by our mental health agencies. We call them designated agencies in state government. Those are organizations like the Howard Center or Washington County Mental Health, Northeast Kingdom Mental Health Services, NCSS in Franklin County, and there's a number of others throughout the state. And as I say, in normal times, their work is already very challenging. They are serving patients with a whole range of mental health needs, ranging from what I would call more conventional counseling to much more extreme interventions with people with serious psychiatric illnesses. With all the stress that is around us right now, the demand on their services has grown considerably, and the acuity of the people they're serving has increased significantly. So more people coming to them for service with greater challenges, which is would be hard under normal circumstances, but a secret that I'll let you in on, and I'm not proud to say this, but that these agencies have not received substantial funding, and there's been a decades-long slow hollowing out of their budgets, and we've started to build out in recent years, but they're nowhere near where they would be ideally in order to be able to easily withstand these kinds of pressures. To put it in perspective, most of their services are done in person under normal conditions. Since the stay-at-home order has gone into effect, Washington County Mental Health Services has performed approximately 80,000 minutes of telemedicine, meaning providing counseling and other services the same way that I'm speaking to you now. So 80,000 minutes, which really required them to shift gears almost instantaneously when the stay-at-home order came out. Luckily, they're prepared for these kinds of things, but still, preparing is different than having to dive in and make it happen. So 80,000 minutes is a lot to do in a short period of time. Howard Center has now performed about 273,000 minutes of telemedicine counseling and services to their clients. And so I am always a very big proponent and celebrant of our designated agencies that provide mental health and addiction services throughout the state. I believe that they get paid too little, and that the stress on them is very, very serious, even when they're just in the normal circumstances. And knowing how much they have on their shoulders right now in terms of responsibility for others makes me all the more supportive of the work they do, and hope that next time you ask someone where they work, if they say Howard Center or Washington County Mental Health or HCRS or United Counseling Services in the Bennington area, wherever it is, I hope you will understand what that means. Basically, they're doing heroic work. They're effectively first responders for mental health, and that work is so critical. So I have great admiration for the work that they're doing right now in extremely difficult times, and I'll leave it at that. A couple other questions that have come up in the last few days. One was from Adrian, who was asking what is being done to make sure that people who work in so-called essential functions like grocery and retail and pharmacy, to make sure the employees are being protected. This was an important question, and in a daily call that happens with myself, the Speaker of the House, and the majority and minority leaders from both the House and Senate, we had the Commissioner of Health on yesterday, and I was glad that I had seen Adrian's question in advance, raised this with the Commissioner of Health, saying that we should not be leaving it up to every particular store owner to figure out what the best safety precautions are for people who are either at the register or stocking shelves, because first of all, it creates a very strange dynamic where you have the employee wanting to believe that their health is at the top, is the top priority of their supervisor, but the supervisor is not always in a great position to know what the right thing to do is. So we asked the commissioner yesterday to come up with clear, what we asked for was not guidance. We asked for clear requirements that would be communicated out to different segments of the essential services industries, telling them what to do, so that there's just no gray area between those who might have a more knowledgeable supervisor or a more enlightened supervisor. We want all people to be protected equally, no matter where they work. So that's a work in progress. My hope is that by tomorrow we'll know if they're putting out requirements versus guidance. Many of you, I'll tell you, I've been fielding so many questions, and we reach out to the people who work in state government at the agencies who administer everything, and I am totally sympathetic to the volume of crises they're trying to address. It is unimaginable. But they are often in the position of asking people to review CDC guidance or other federal agency sites. And what we know just intuitively is that most people are not used to going to federal websites and finding forums or looking at FAQs, or they don't have time to do that. And so it's really critical that we provide requirements so that we just take all the gray out of it. Another question came from Jennifer. This said, in light of the fact that so many people are at home, this would be a great time to sort of invigorate or enliven the democratic process in terms of people who are constituents being able to watch government in action. And Jennifer, I totally agree. And the challenge here is that from the legislative point of view, we put our information to be accessible on our website. It's not always easy for those who haven't used our system to find it. So for anyone who is wondering whether there are state government meetings that are occurring in this week or next week, if you go to the legislature's website, if you just Google or use a search for Vermont Legislature, you will see, it will take you right to the site. There is a link for committees, and when you click on that, you can just go to any committee you want, and when you see the word agenda, that's what you're going to hunt for, and it will tell you when the committee's meeting, what they're going to be talking about, and under our new remote meetings, it will tell you how to access the meeting using a live YouTube channel that you don't have to type a password or anything into. So in some ways, we have had more people watching our activities than ever, which I think is really great. But obviously, we want even more people to be able to watch and participate and be able to send questions. I say this with, each legislator, in some ways we get used to a certain routine at the State House where only certain people are ever in our committee rooms. And so it's kind of intriguing to have far more diverse sets of eyes and ears watching our work, listening into our discussions. On that note, I will say a couple more things before I wrap. One is that almost every day, the Senate is having a full Senate call where we're sharing ideas, trying to make sure that we each are communicating what we might have picked up on in our county, and or throwing out ideas that are worth everyone else knowing about, or challenges that their constituents are facing that might be relevant to everybody else. And one of the things we'll be talking about tomorrow is something that I have heard from several employers, both for-profit and nonprofit, and it's something that concerns me very much, and let me explain it as briefly as I can. One of the things that we have seen in the last 2 weeks is a level of unemployment and a suddenness of unemployment that has not, I don't think, been seen in maybe Vermont history. This was not a months-long slide of unemployment. This was almost an overnight tsunami. I've mentioned before that there were 14,500 people applied for unemployment last week compared to just 500 in the same week the year before. And we know that once the Department of Labor has the capacity to take new applications under the new federal rules for self-employed and independent contractors, we're going to see another wave that's going to be spectacular. And all this federal relief is helpful because if people have to stay home and you lose your income, you still need to pay the bills. And so on the one hand, we say this is really good news for people who need to pay the rent, who have a mortgage to pay, who have all the other bills to pay, who need to have food. You're dealing with kids who are home because the school's closed. You're dealing with all the childcare stuff that you've now got to do at home or still have them go out. All that stuff. It's good news that the money is going to be coming to Vermont. It is good news that the federal government is funding a benefit for people who wouldn't otherwise benefit from the unemployment system. So independent contractors, sole proprietors, and some small business owners will be able to get a benefit. And I should add here that the rules and guidelines from the federal government have still not come, but the Department of Labor hopes that will be tomorrow, that they'll know more. So for all of you who are wondering when you can officially log into the Department of Labor site or call the number as a sole proprietor or independent contractor to get benefits, we should know more tomorrow about what that timeline is going to be. However, the reason I say all of this preface about how good it is that all of these benefits are available is that one of the inadvertent outcomes of this is that for some people, especially lower paid people, it is very possible that they will actually receive less compensation by going to work than if they didn't go to work. So there are probably multiple problems with that. The first is that it just shouldn't be the case. Someone who goes to work makes less money than if he or she chose to stay home for the exact same position. So we've got to find a way to make sure that people are made, that gap is closed, at least closed, and if not more. The second is we know that the people who are still going to work also are the people who are putting themselves at the most risk. You're interfacing with customers, you're dealing with elders, you're in a hospital or healthcare setting, so you may be more likely to get infected than everybody who's staying home. So the fact that for many people it's like a double-edged sword. You both could make more money just by not going to work, and while you're getting paid less than staying home, you might be more likely to get sick. So it just seems on its face that we have to do something about this. Tomorrow morning, when all the senators are gathered together, I'm going to express that we have to start coming up with a strategy to solve this problem. Obviously, we'll work closely with the governor and with the House to make sure we all come together and find some sort of solution. If we weren't doing it for fairness and we weren't doing it for any of the other reasons, we would do it because the people just plain deserve our gratitude for showing up and doing these vital services during this very, very challenging time. So I'm hopeful that in the coming days we'll find a good strategy to meet the needs so that people are rewarded for showing up and doing all of these difficult tasks. And with that, I'll close by saying that I have continued. I had made the commitment that I was going to send a note of gratitude to people who are required to show up for work, who have jobs that usually go unnoticed, unappreciated, or undervalued. So I've been sending a brief note of thanks for those people's work, telling them that I know that while they're not getting rich at their job, that we do value and honor it. And I will be, today I sent one out to the staff at Brock, which is the Community Action Agency in southwestern Vermont. The day before was the staff at 3 Cathedral Square in downtown Burlington. And going out in tomorrow's mail will be the cleaning crew at North Country Hospital. So these are people who I'm pretty sure I've never met, but that in some ways is irrelevant because they should be hearing from people all throughout the state that we are thankful to them for their work, which I hope will continue to be grateful after this crisis is over and have a new appreciation for how valuable they are. But if this thing is protracted for weeks or even a couple months, People are going to need to be bolstered. They're going to need to be picked up. They're going to have days when they wonder why they're showing up at work and putting themselves at risk. And so I think they really need to hear from people throughout the state, even people they've never met, which is one of the reasons I'm sending as many of these to people in other parts of the state so that they know that people aren't taking them for granted. So with that, I'm going to sign off for tonight and hope to see you back tomorrow, and keep your questions coming. Thank you.